Why do so many marriages collapse? Why do couples who once swore eternal love end up as strangers, or even enemies? Nietzsche believed it's because love itself often begins as a lie. Not a sweet romance, but a dangerous illusion. An illusion that blinds us, traps us, and eventually destroys us. In this video, we'll uncover Nietzsche's brutal truth about love, marriage, and why divorce might not be a tragedy at all, but the moment when the mask finally falls. Nietzsche often confronted the deepest illusions that human beings cling to, and love was one of the most powerful of them. When he spoke of love as an illusion, he was not dismissing the feelings of attraction, passion, or devotion that people experience, but rather pointing out the hidden forces at work beneath those emotions. For Nietzsche, what people call love is rarely about the other person in their full reality. Instead, it is about the projection of one's own desires, ideals, and needs onto another human being. In the early stages of love, individuals are not truly seeing their partner, but rather seeing a mirror of their own longing for completion, security, or transcendence. The beloved becomes a screen onto which we project our fantasies. This is why Nietzsche described love as a form of self-deception, something that disguises its true nature under the language of purity and eternal devotion. The illusion is seductive because it feels so powerful. When people fall in love, they are often intoxicated with the sense that they have found someone who will give their lives meaning, who will shield them from loneliness, who will remain a source of constant joy and passion. In truth, Nietzsche would say that such expectations are impossible. Human beings are complex, changing, and flawed. No one can live up to the image constructed in the first rush of infatuation. But because people mistake their own projections for reality, they enter relationships and marriages under a spell. They believe that the intensity of their emotions guarantees permanence, and they convince themselves that what they feel is absolute truth. Nietzsche saw this as one of the great lies of culture, the idea that love is eternal and selfless. In his view, it is neither. Love, stripped of illusion, is driven by instinct, desire, and the will to possess. Nietzsche's critique becomes clearer when one considers how love often shifts over time. At the beginning, love feels unconditional, but gradually conditions emerge. Disappointments, conflicts, and differences reveal themselves, and the image of the beloved begins to crack. The person one thought they knew turns out to be someone else, with needs and flaws of their own. Nietzsche would argue that this disillusionment is not a failure of love, but the exposure of what it always was, a temporary spell built on illusion. The supposed purity of love was never real, only a disguise for deeper drives. For instance, one might desire love because it provides social status, because it satisfies the longing to be desired, or because it offers comfort against the fear of solitude. None of these motives are evil, but they are very different from the story people tell themselves about true love. By calling love an illusion, Nietzsche was not necessarily saying that people should avoid it. Rather, he wanted individuals to become honest about what love is and what it is not. If one sees it clearly, love becomes less of a divine promise and more of a human experience shaped by need, biology, and will. The illusion arises when people pretend that their love is something timeless and pure, untouched by selfishness or power. Nietzsche thought this dishonesty led to suffering, because when the mask inevitably falls, people feel betrayed. They blame their partners, or they despair over the loss of something they thought was eternal. In reality, it was the illusion itself that betrayed them. To see love clearly is to accept it as a force both creative and destructive, both selfish and connective. Nietzsche's challenge is to live without clinging to the lie, to enter relationships without the intoxication of false promises, and to recognize the will to power that pulses beneath passion. Only then, he thought, can one approach love with strength rather than blindness, and avoid the inevitable collapse that comes when illusion is mistaken for truth. When Nietzsche reflected on marriage, he saw it as an institution often built upon promises that could never be fulfilled. For him, the way people entered marriage revealed the depth of their illusions. At the beginning of a union, couples are swept away by the intensity of their emotions, and in that intoxication they make vows of eternal devotion. They imagine a lifetime of passion, harmony, and unwavering companionship, and they take these feelings as proof that their marriage will be different from all others. Nietzsche, however, believed that such promises rest on a fragile foundation. The passion that inspires these vows is temporary by nature, and the attempt to transform it into something permanent leads to inevitable disappointment. What begins as fire eventually cools, and when it does, the couple discovers that the institution of marriage was built on expectations that reality cannot sustain. Nietzsche thought of love as a force that thrives in intensity, but he questioned whether that same intensity could survive domestication. In the ritual of marriage, people take something fleeting and unpredictable, eros, passion, desire, and try to fix it into permanence. They sign legal contracts, recite vows, and imagine themselves binding not only their present, but also their future to this single flame. Yet desire and passion were never meant to be fixed in place. They change, they diminish, they transform into something else. Nietzsche suggested that by trying to capture passion in the form of marriage, people are already preparing the ground for its collapse. The institution asks love to be what it cannot be: eternal, unchanging, immune to time. The danger becomes clear when one considers the gap between expectation and reality. In the early days of marriage, couples are enchanted by the idea that their bond will remain as vibrant as it was at the start. They imagine they have transcended the ordinary fate of relationships, that their connection is exceptional and unbreakable. This conviction, Nietzsche believed, is a kind of hubris, a refusal to see the truth about human nature. Over time, daily life intrudes. The monotony of routine replaces the thrill of discovery, and both partners reveal aspects of themselves that had been hidden or overlooked. The intensity of desire gives way to familiarity and sometimes to resentment. When this happens, the grand promises of eternal love are exposed as fantasies. What was once believed to be an eternal flame is revealed to be a temporary spark. Nietzsche's critique here is not simply cynicism. He did not deny that deep bonds can form between people, nor did he dismiss the value of companionship. Instead, he was exposing the cultural narrative that insists on eternal passion as the foundation of marriage. For him, this was the real danger. People build their lives on a story that cannot survive the realities of time, change, and human imperfection. When the story falls apart, they experience betrayal, not because their partner failed them, but because the promise itself was never sustainable. The institution of marriage, with its insistence on vows of forever, perpetuates this illusion and traps individuals in a cycle of disillusionment. At the heart of Nietzsche's perspective is the idea that honesty about love and marriage is rare. Most people prefer the comforting lie, the fantasy of eternal romance, because it makes the leap into marriage seem less terrifying. To promise forever feels noble and reassuring, even if it is impossible. Nietzsche, however, urged people to confront the truth. Marriage is often born out of idealized projections, and when the illusions wear off, the structure collapses. By seeing marriage as built on false promises, he forces us to ask whether it is better to construct relationships on more sober foundations, or whether society continues to cling to illusions that lead inevitably to disappointment and, eventually, divorce. Nietzsche's view of human relationships was rooted in his broader philosophy of the will to power, the idea that life itself is driven not simply by survival or reproduction, but by a deeper instinct to expand, to assert, to overcome. When applied to love and relationships, this means that what people often describe as selfless devotion or pure affection is in fact charged with dynamics of desire and power. Love, far from being a gentle and equal bond, is often a struggle of wills, a negotiation of dominance and submission, a constant movement of giving and taking. For Nietzsche, to love is also to desire possession, to seek control over the other, to want them to serve one's vision of fulfillment. This does not make love false in the sense of being unreal, but it reveals its hidden structure, the instinctual drives that culture tries to disguise under poetic words and romantic ideals. In Nietzsche's analysis, the romantic tradition presents love as an exalted state of sacrifice, where two individuals merge seamlessly into one. But he insisted that this image masks the truth. Beneath the surface, each partner is moved by their own impulses, seeking affirmation, security, or conquest. The beloved becomes a source of nourishment for the lover's sense of power, someone through whom they can expand their influence or confirm their worth. Even acts of tenderness or sacrifice are not free of this drive. When one sacrifices for a partner, Nietzsche would say it is often because the sacrifice strengthens the relationship in a way that ultimately serves the individual's own sense of value or power. Love is never detached from the self. It is an extension of it. This perspective also explains the volatility of relationships. When love is understood as a struggle of desires and wills, it becomes clear why conflicts arise so naturally. Each partner seeks, consciously or not, to shape the other according to their own needs. They may expect admiration, loyalty, or conformity to certain ideals. Over time, these demands can clash. One person may resist being molded, while the other insists on asserting their vision. The harmony of love then reveals itself as fragile, maintained only so long as both partners' wills align or balance one another. When that balance collapses, the underlying struggle emerges more visibly, and the relationship can unravel. Nietzsche saw this not as an accident, but as the natural consequence of the forces that animate love itself. The presence of power in relationships does not mean that love is simply manipulation or exploitation. Rather, it means that love is more complex than the idealized notion of mutual surrender. The will to power can manifest in creative ways, driving individuals to grow, to challenge one another, to achieve more than they could alone. At its best, love can be a union where each partner strengthens the other, not by erasing difference, but by sharpening it. Nietzsche valued relationships that encouraged growth, that forced individuals to confront their limitations and strive for greater strength. Yet he remained skeptical that most marriages or partnerships achieve this. Too often, the struggle of wills turned into a deadlock, where one partner dominated and the other submitted, or where both partners drained each other through constant conflict. To Nietzsche, the cultural portrayal of love as harmony was misleading because it denied this essential struggle. By refusing to acknowledge the presence of desire and power, society created expectations that could never be met. Couples believed that love should mean peace, equality, and eternal unity. But in reality, they were entering into a dynamic of competing wills. When the tension surfaced, they felt betrayed, when in fact they were only witnessing the truth of what love had always been. Nietzsche's challenge was to strip away the comforting myths and face the raw forces at play. In doing so, he did not seek to destroy love, but to redefine it in more honest terms, as a dance of desire, a negotiation of power, and a testing ground for strength. Nietzsche's insight into divorce flows directly from his understanding of love as illusion. If the passion that begins a relationship is largely built on projections and fantasies, then the collapse of that illusion is not a tragic accident, but the inevitable unveiling of reality. When two people marry under the spell of idealized love, they believe they are committing themselves to an eternal bond, a union untouched by time or conflict. Yet life inevitably exposes the cracks in that vision. The beloved is revealed as a human being with flaws, needs, and contradictions, and the marriage must face the weight of routine, responsibility, and disappointment. Nietzsche would argue that divorce emerges precisely when the veil of illusion falls away, and the truth can no longer be denied. It is not merely the breakdown of affection, but the exposure of the false story upon which the relationship was founded. For Nietzsche, the dissolution of a marriage is not always a failure in the moral sense, but the natural consequence of mistaking passion for permanence. What began as intoxication cannot sustain itself indefinitely. Lovers convinced themselves that their feelings were eternal, that their vows guaranteed a future of endless devotion. But when passion fades and reality asserts itself, the promises lose their grounding. Divorce then appears not as a betrayal of love, but as the moment when the pretense collapses, when individuals can no longer maintain the lie of eternal romance. Nietzsche's philosophy reveals divorce as the breaking point where illusion and reality clash, where the dream of eternal love finally dissolves under the pressure of life. The cultural narrative surrounding marriage often intensifies this collapse. Society tends to present marriage as an achievement, a sacred bond, or the ultimate proof of love. Divorce, in turn, is stigmatized as failure or weakness. Nietzsche, however, questioned this moral framework. He believed it is dishonest to treat marriage as the crowning evidence of love, because it assumes that love itself is capable of permanence. By exposing the transient and illusory nature of passion, Nietzsche shows that many divorces are not failures of individuals, but the consequence of a flawed ideal. People are punished socially for refusing to live within a lie, even though the lie was unsustainable from the start. In this sense, divorce can even appear as a kind of liberation, a recognition that honesty is better than pretense. This perspective casts new light on the emotional pain associated with divorce. People often feel devastated when their marriage ends, not only because of the loss of companionship, but because of the shattering of the dream they believed in. They mourn not just the relationship, but the image of eternal love that once gave them security. Nietzsche would interpret this suffering as the price of illusion. When we cling to false stories about love, their collapse is inevitably painful. But that collapse is also clarifying. It strips away the comforting myths and forces individuals to confront reality without disguise. In this confrontation lies both the pain and the possibility of growth. Nietzsche's view of divorce also challenges the idea that staying together at all costs is a virtue. If the relationship is built on lies, if both partners are living in resentment or suppression, then the insistence on permanence becomes destructive. It keeps people bound to illusions that limit their growth. Divorce, though painful, can mark the recognition of truth, the refusal to continue pretending. For Nietzsche, the courage to face the end of a marriage is part of the larger courage to face life honestly, without resorting to myths and comforting lies. It is not the end of love itself, but the exposure of what love had been all along, a temporary spell that could not endure the weight of eternity. Nietzsche's philosophy often circled back to the theme of growth, of becoming, of the individual's task to transcend limitations and transform suffering into strength. When applied to love and marriage, this meant that a true partnership should not be about comfort alone, nor about preserving illusions, but about challenging and strengthening both individuals involved. In his view, the measure of a relationship's worth was whether it allowed each person to flourish, to expand their potential, and to pursue the path of self-overcoming. Yet Nietzsche was also deeply skeptical, for he observed that most marriages did the opposite. Instead of fostering growth, they became prisons of habit and resentment, where individuals were forced into conformity, where their deepest drives were suppressed for the sake of stability or social approval. What began as passion turned into routine, and what was once celebrated as love became a quiet cage. For Nietzsche, the danger of conventional marriage was its demand for permanence and sameness. People enter into it with vows of eternal devotion, expecting that the person they marry will remain fixed in identity, personality, and desire. But human beings are not static. They are in constant motion, changing with time, shaped by new experiences, ambitions, and struggles. A relationship that does not adapt to this movement soon begins to stifle one or both partners. Nietzsche thought that many marriages collapse not because of betrayal or lack of affection, but because the institution resists the natural evolution of human beings. When growth is blocked, resentment takes root, and what was once love becomes poisoned. Divorce then becomes a release from a structure that no longer supports life's forward movement. Nietzsche's ideal was not the romanticized union where two people merge into one, erasing difference in the name of harmony. Instead, he envisioned a relationship where difference is preserved, even sharpened, so that each partner compels the other toward greater strength. Love, at its best, should be an alliance between two beings striving for more, not a retreat into comfort or a defense against loneliness. It should be a place where challenges are welcomed, where each partner is forced to confront their weaknesses and pushed to become more than they were before. This is why Nietzsche spoke of marriage as a high responsibility, something that should not be entered lightly. It required honesty, strength, and a recognition that the real purpose of union is not to cling to a fleeting passion, but to create a shared ground where both lives can grow. Yet Nietzsche's writings show a deep doubt about whether most people are capable of such a demanding vision. He observed that many people enter marriage not out of strength, but out of weakness. They marry to escape solitude, to seek stability, or to satisfy social expectations. In such cases, the marriage is not a partnership of growth, but a refuge from life's challenges. Instead of expanding, individuals shrink within the roles assigned to them. They compromise their desires, silence their ambitions, and settle into routines that dull their vitality. Over time, this suppression breeds bitterness, and the relationship that was meant to protect them becomes the very source of their suffering. Nietzsche thought this was why so many marriages eventually dissolve. They are not founded on the will to grow, but on the fear of being alone. A true marriage, for Nietzsche, would demand courage, because it would mean exposing oneself not only to the joy of companionship, but to the struggle of transformation. It would not allow one to remain unchanged, but would constantly test, provoke, and demand. The tragedy of most unions is that they seek safety rather than growth, illusion rather than truth. Nietzsche wanted people to face the harder path, to abandon the lie of eternal comfort, and instead seek relationships that strengthen both partners. Only then, he believed, could love and marriage rise above illusion and become forces of genuine life, forces that push human beings toward the higher possibilities of existence. Nietzsche's challenge to humanity was always a call to face truths without retreating into comforting illusions, and nowhere is this more evident than in his view of love and marriage. He believed that one of the greatest lies people tell themselves is that love is pure, eternal, and selfless. This illusion allows individuals to feel secure, to believe their lives have been touched by something transcendent, and to escape the anxieties of impermanence. Yet Nietzsche argued that this comfort comes at a price. By clinging to illusions, people blind themselves to the deeper realities of desire, power, and change. When relationships eventually falter under the weight of reality, individuals are devastated, not because love has truly died, but because they were unwilling to face its true nature from the beginning. For Nietzsche, the courage to face the truth is not about rejecting love altogether, but about stripping it of false promises and living with honesty. This demand for honesty is difficult because it asks people to confront aspects of themselves and their relationships that they would rather ignore. To admit that love is not eternal, that it is bound by time and circumstance, that it is driven by instinct and need, is to undermine one of the most cherished myths of human life. People want to believe in the fairy tale of soulmates, in the idea that passion can be preserved forever, in the promise that marriage can freeze love into permanence. Nietzsche warned that these myths are dangerous precisely because they are so seductive. They encourage individuals to build their lives on unstable ground, and when the illusion collapses, the fall is devastating. Only by rejecting these myths and facing love as it truly is can people hope to avoid such disillusionment. Nietzsche's vision of courage in love was not a cold dismissal of feeling, but a deeper embrace of reality. To love courageously means to recognize the limitations of love without diminishing its intensity. It is to enter a relationship without pretending that it can escape change, conflict, or eventual dissolution. Instead of expecting eternal passion, one accepts love as a powerful but finite force, shaped by desire, struggle, and growth. In this way, courage transforms love from a fragile illusion into a lived reality. The relationship is no longer based on promises of eternity, but on the willingness to confront whatever truths emerge between two people. This requires strength because it demands vulnerability without the safety of lies. By challenging people to abandon illusions, Nietzsche also pointed toward a richer, more demanding understanding of human freedom. If love is stripped of its myths, then individuals must take responsibility for what they create within it. They cannot hide behind the excuse of cultural narratives or social expectations. They must face their partners honestly, acknowledging their own desires and limitations while recognizing the same in the other. This honesty can be uncomfortable, even brutal, but Nietzsche believed it was the only way to build relationships that did not collapse under false expectations. Courage in this sense is not about avoiding pain, but about embracing it as part of life's unfolding. To live without illusions is to accept suffering as inseparable from joy, and to see both as opportunities for growth. Nietzsche's call to face truth in love also reflects his larger philosophy of affirmation. He urged people to say yes to life as it is, not as they wish it to be. This affirmation required rejecting the comforting fictions that hide the harshness of existence, including the fictions surrounding love and marriage. By tearing away the mask, individuals encounter love in its raw form, intense, flawed, impermanent, yet profoundly human. Divorce, heartbreak, and disillusionment then appear not as catastrophic failures, but as moments when truth asserts itself. To face these moments with courage is to live authentically, without compromise. Nietzsche saw in this courage the possibility of transforming love from a lie into a truth, not by making it eternal, but by embracing it fully in its fleeting, fragile, and honest reality. So, when Nietzsche strips love of its illusions, he isn't trying to destroy it, he's trying to free it. He wants us to see that many marriages collapse not because people are evil or weak, but because they built their lives on promises that reality could never keep. The collapse of love is not always tragedy. It can also be truth breaking through. To love with courage, as Nietzsche challenges us, is to abandon the comforting myths of eternal passion and face each other honestly, as changing, flawed, and striving beings. Love, then, is not about clinging to illusion, but about embracing growth, struggle, and truth. And perhaps, if we dare to live this way, we can transform both love and divorce into something far greater. Not endings, not failures, but steps on the path to becoming who we truly are.